This is going to be installment number 9 of the 100-day art challenge. I haven't been numbering the videos, but I'm going to start telling you certain submissions so that you're aware of how far along I am, and there will be 100 in total, but for now we're on number 9, and this is the first of many oil pastel paintings that I do for this challenge. And I start off on some kind of textured paper or cardboard, and on this occasion it's when you buy a photo frame from somewhere, and it's just a cheap one, you don't get a frame made by a frame shop or frame makers. If you just buy one from, say, the Range or whatever your place is where you see picture frames, they have this piece of paper with it, and on the opposite side of the paper it'll just say the dimensions of the frame, and if you flip it over it'll have this textured brown or grey side to it. Not all of them do, but a lot of them do, and that's what I had here, and I really like that to draw on. So I thought, I don't really use colour very often with this type of surface, and it would be nice. What I do use very often is ink, so I thought I could sketch out the proportions of the face loosely with a pen, not go into too much detail, but just get enough down where I feel comfortable that I've marked out and plotted certain landmarks on the face, so that I can then cover over all of my pen marks with the oil pastel. That was the idea, and that's what I do consistently through a lot of these oil pastel portraits. I think if not all of them, then 99% of them. On this occasion I'm drawing a friend of mine called John Williams, a farmer who I've interviewed and hung out with and visited very often, and took for a drive recently with him and his dog. Came with me to a place where I wanted to collect natural pigment in order to do some egg tempera paintings, which will be coming up, I don't know how soon, but it'll be coming up as part of this challenge. So I will include not only the painting and the materials that I gather in order to make the paint, but I'll also include video of us in the car driving there, and footage of me collecting the pigment, and then I've tried to film myself grinding up the pigment, and I'll try to show you the process as thoroughly as I can, because I think it's really interesting to see egg tempera as a painting medium, but also being used from natural resources as opposed to buying synthetic pigment, which I do have some still. I was introduced to egg tempera painting in art school, not by a tutor like you'd imagine, but by one of the students who thought that it would be beneficial for us to be introduced to that process, and I'm very grateful that she did that. I filmed it for her and sent her the video. I wish I would have filmed it better, because I was doing it I just didn't plan to film it, is what I'm trying to say. When she started doing the demonstration, I just thought on a whim, this is probably worth filming to rewatch, and then I didn't even think that afterwards she would want it. Anyway, you can see here I'm redrawing certain proportions, like making the jaw drop down further so that I have room for the mouth, and making the head go further back, and elongating where the neck line drops to. And it's all okay to do that, because this will be covered up by the thick pigment of the oil pastels, and if there are any marks that you can see, it will just be wispy lines really, so I don't mind at all this being scribbly and scratchy and imprecise. At the moment I quite like the concept of plotting out someone's face in this way. I'm doing far more marks than I do in the future, but that's because this is the first time that I've done an oil pastel painting for this challenge. So I think that's why I'm not sure exactly how much to draw, and you really don't need to draw that much. But it doesn't do any harm. It's just far more efficient to just plot out the eye sockets, the nose, the mouth, and the shape of the head. and the rest you can just draw in with oil pastels. But I do quite like the finish that I start to be left with is one where you can see the outlines in certain places, and I think that's quite nice. It wasn't something I considered doing when I started. I thought I would cover everything so that it was just colour making the shapes and the shadows and light. But when you leave parts of the outline, I'm always worried that it will look like a comic book drawing. Not that because I love comic books, so it's not to say that that's a bad thing, but for this type of art, I'm trying to make it look like a different style than that. And instead, it doesn't look like a comic book drawing. It actually looks like a different side of fine art. It's hard to explain. I'm not sure exactly what the movement would be called, but yeah, it's an interesting crossover between fine art portraiture and something slightly more illustrative. But yeah, I do enjoy it, and I end up relying on this in order to catch up, because if I fall behind, some days I'm just too busy with work to produce a piece of artwork and film it, because it just takes too much time out of my day when I have other things to do. So if I have to catch up, I can do 2 or 3 of these in a day. Eventually, this one is on a larger piece of card than I end up using. I'm kind of giving away a bit of the spoilers for what is to come, but I do go smaller and smaller with my pastel paintings. Now, my first experience with pastels was soft pastels, and they're very different from oil pastels. Soft pastels are very dry, and a lot of pastel dust or kind of, loose pigment will surround everything, and it will be very, you don't want any kind of breeze, or you don't want to blow on it at all, because it will go everywhere, and you should really cover any electronics, and I don't. Whereas oil pastels are quite a bit more waxy, and what I experience is the collection of flakes of the pigment building up, because I use them very heavily. I put down a tone and then I go on top of it with another and just build up the layers until I'm happy with what I've made. I think that's what I like about it, is that it's quite messy. At first I didn't enjoy them because I found them to be just a strange feeling when you're actually using them on the surface, compared to soft pastels, which are much smoother than chalk and have this almost buttery spread to them when you're pushing it across the surface. Whereas with oil pastels, I'm almost scrubbing, and something not violent, but something quite aggressive about the application of oil pastels. I should say, by the way, for a portrait of John Williams, this is not very flattering or a great likeness, but it was inspired from reference of John. That's what I used as a starting point. I've painted John before as an acrylic painting for an exhibition that I had last year, and I've drawn him a couple of times. He's a great model, he's a lovely person, and a good friend. So, in fact, I'm overdue giving him a call, because he's been away a couple of times, so I'd like to see how he's doing and what his little trips were like, because he's constantly away. He's retired now, he's no longer a farmer, but that's how I met him, was that here we are, starting in with the pastels now, so you can see I'm just scrubbing the tones on. But yeah, the way I met John was that a friend of mine, Petra, and I were in his field, and she was wrapping up one of his machines in some fabric and photographing it, and I was drawing some pieces of these metal that was no longer used, that were on the grass, and trying to get inspiration from the shadows from the field and the machinery, and just seeing what came from being out there and trying to consider what our project would become. And then this Land Rover comes driving up, and it's John, and he's got 2 dogs in his car. And I go up and talk to him, because Petra's German, so she's not quite as good at the diplomacy side of things. Not that she's not diplomatic, but she even said that she'd rather me do that side of things. So I went up and spoke to him and ingratiated us to him as artists who meant no harm. We'd put everything back and we wouldn't litter. And he was just perfectly welcoming and generous and sweet. So he gets out of his van. The dogs run out and they're playing and excited to see us, and they're looking in Petra's bag and trying to eat things and jumping all over us. It was really fun. And I ended up recording a bit of the conversation with John because he was so friendly that I thought, let's just take advantage of this moment and see if he'll talk on the record so that we can use parts of the recording in our project, because not only was I making paintings and drawings, I was also trying to make art films that would use the audio recordings from farmers. And he was very generous that way. He gave us a lot of his time. He loved talking about farming and about his history on the land and his experiences, which was great, and that's what we wanted from him. And Petra would make, as I said, she'd wrap the different pieces of metal and machinery in this white fabric, and it would make this lovely transformation of the piece. But she also collected the silage wrap from the ground and the field and the hedges, and would wash the silage wrap, because the silage wrap basically looks like a plastic bag that's used to wrap bales of hay ready for storage, and they can keep them for years and they're fine. Whereas if you don't wrap them in that stuff, apparently they don't keep as long. So that was what they use it for. But our concern was that the silage wrap would then be embedded in the concrete, in the grass, in the hedges, and it would be litter. And it's plastic. It's not good to just be discarded that way. It should be disposed of better. And so she'd collect that, she'd wash it because it'd be full of muck, and then she would kind of weave it and wind it and thread it into something which looked like a rope. And she would then make wheels out of it and have it pouring through and knot it and make all kinds of interesting structures with it. And it made the whole gallery space that we put our show into really transform, so that we had something very interesting to present as a concept for our project. I haven't seen anyone else do anything too similar to it, so I think we achieved something quite good there. And sadly, we only exhibited in one other place together, and that was called the Trefnant Inn in Trefnant, North Wales. And when Petra moved down to the south of England, she took her artwork out of the Trefnant Inn, and our first exhibition was in Carnarvon. So she took her work. We exhibited in Carnarvon, then we exhibited in Trefnant, and then she took her work down south with her. So now the Trefnant Inn is full of my artwork, and I have a few other pieces that I'm putting into there. And in fact, this 100-day art challenge was a good opportunity for me to make more work for that space at the Trefnant Inn, the space which was now vacant since Petra's taken her work down. And I still haven't put it up, so I'll be filming that, and that'll be part of a vlog for a video soonish. But that's what I'm going to be doing. Now, just so that we're going back to this picture and you can see what I've got so far, is I'm putting down some very dark pink, and I do learn after a while putting down a dark colour and then going over the top of it with lighter colour is a good method for using oil pastel. I believe better than the opposite way around. Better than having a light colour and then putting dark on top. Putting down a dark colour means that the light colour will then mix with it. Whereas if you put down a light colour and put a dark colour on top, it doesn't mix the same, and you're instead just only covering part of what you've done. It's hard to explain. It kind of blends if you do it dark then light. And I suppose that's how you use oil paint, is you put down the dark first and then you use light on top. So I believe that's why I've found it works better this way. So I'm trying to cover the shadow side of John's face at the moment. And the idea is that if you cover this side with shadow, then you can go on top and lighten certain parts, and it will look more convincing as light, and it will also be more interesting than doing something like black or brown. To have something vibrant, as the darker colour is still tonally accurate whilst being visually more vibrant and more engaging as the colour composition of the piece. It also reflects that the skin's translucency will show blood underneath the skin, so using reds will then enrichen the portrait and enliven the subject. So I'm just picking my way through at the moment. You can tell this is the first one that I've done, because after a while I'm so used to the materials that I just charge into it knowing I do this, then this, then this, then this, and that's how it always works, and it becomes a very reliable medium for me to use, because I know better how it works and how the layers will complement the subject. And there's still room for experimentation. It's not all predictable, but at the moment I'm completely unsure about whether this is working or not, or whether I've made it look as though he's missing skin on one side of his face. And I know it can look very dramatic the way it is at the moment, but trust me that after you've covered the whole thing, not the whole surface, but the whole drawing of the face, it then changes how dark colours look on the surface. And plus I'm going on top of it for layering as well, in order to show parts of the darkness underneath, but to also suggest parts of the light. But there is shadow to be captured still on this side, so that's why I'm going underneath the lips here, and I'm trying to make sure that I utilise the darker colours to show a shadow and light side of the form, which is always going to be more powerful for portraiture than to have flat light. Excuse my cough. And I quite enjoy oil pastel for the power of their colours. I used to think that I'd always want to mix colours, but sometimes it just happens naturally, and other times you don't have to mix them, because the very light flesh tone pink on the left doesn't really need mixing in order to sit well. It's how you use it with other colours to contrast on the surface, and that's what I'm trying to figure out here. But yeah, because it's all pinks and reds and bits of yellow, obviously you can see there, it's trying to plot out what is working here and what do I need to do to try and strengthen the features on this portrait and make sure that I don't go too far, and knowing if there is a too far or if you can keep pushing things around. I'm not sure if there's ever been a pastel portrait that I've made where I think this is now lost. I know that I've done a pastel painting where I have stopped because it wasn't looking as successful as I was hoping it would, because it was I think it was just a still life of some flowers, and it just didn't seem to express the kind of delicacy and the grace of a vase of flowers at a wake that I'd attended, and I was trying to capture all of these lovely arrangements that had been set out in the church, and when I tried them with oil pastel it just seemed like too clumsy a medium to capture it accurately and to do it justice. But I still have it here, and I may revisit it because I know it's one of the submissions that are coming up, so I would rather make that successful than to abandon it and just show it as a failure and then have to make another piece of artwork to compensate. I never want to film and upload a submission where I think, well, I don't like this piece of artwork, here's what I did, the end. I'd rather say I don't like this piece, so instead I'm going to do another piece that is either the same or completely different, whatever I need to do to make sure that my creative impulses are fed and rewarded at the end of the day. Now here's an interesting thing, doing hair, because John has white hair, I start with white, but I know that you can't just have white there because that will have no tonality, and hair is not just a flat colour. But the white on this brown speckled background is quite nice. It's not an unpleasant mixture. But then adding bits of grey to show where the hair then turns, and to add little touches of grey in between and the white, it's subtle, but it adds quite a lot. And that's again why I think the strength of oil pastels are in the simplicity of how you can use them, and yet the power of what they offer. I do think they're a very strong source of light and shadow. Very interesting, deep colours, very pigment rich. So I do enjoy that, and it's not always that easy to have something that's so striking so quickly, so I credit that with the materials more than my execution of this piece. But it has been enjoyable thus far, and you can see how the slightest touches are quite rich, and it looks black, but that's actually blue that I've added there. You can see it as the nostrils that it was blue, even though when I did it in the eyes, when I did a touch for the eyes, it looked like I was adding black. And what I like about using this, as I said, this backing for the picture frame, this piece of thick paper that's inside, is that instead of white, you have this tone that you're working on top of, so you don't have white just blasting through in the spaces where you haven't covered it with oil pastel. Toned paper and toned cardboard is always my favourite to work on, and again, trying different things with the darker colours in places means that, you know, it's experiments, it's seeing if it works, and then seeing if you need to cover it up with something else to soften it. But you can see there's a nice reflection of light on the left hand side and shadow building on the right, and it is now just trying to balance that and make sure that it looks acceptable as a portrait. And it's a learning experience at this point. I know certain things that it needs, and I'm also unsure about how much you have to do. Sometimes you look at classic portraits from, centuries ago, and realise that some people have learnt how to really simplify certain aspects of a portrait in order to concentrate your focus on the important parts, either the eyes or the mouth or the brow, or something which really speaks to who the person is. And when you're less experienced like what I am, you think that you need to push things around everywhere to make sure that it's offering enough depth and detail and realism. It's why now my taste in art is shifting slightly to slightly more abstract and slightly more impressionistic and expressionistic work, because of the interesting ways that people have learnt to express themselves and the character of the subject in a very creative manner, using the mediums, or the media I should say, that they have. And this would be very useful for mixed media artwork. My first submission for this challenge was a mixed media piece. It was watercolour and soft pastels and oil pastels and ink, and I used quite a few things to make it really textured, and it was based on farming. So this, like that, is part of this project. I mean, this feasibly could be put into Trevenant Inn, because it's a portrait of John, and there's already a painted portrait of John in Trevenant Inn, so there's no harm in putting another one in there. But I'm not sure exactly what I'll be submitting yet. I just know that more work needs to be made. And as far as the challenge goes, I think that a face like this is quite interesting. It's not exactly John's face, but it's enough where it's an interesting face that you can look at and engage with. I think that really accurate portraiture is incredibly impressive, but it's not always the most engaging. It depends. It can be, but at times it's not what you think it would be. For a moment there, I thought that I'd not drawn this green that I'm doing for the shirt up to the jaw, which I thought was a mistake. But in truth, what I've done is that I'm drawing in the darker green, like a bluey green, it's almost a turquoise, for the shadow underneath the shirt. and I'm now going to add a lighter colour for the green of his shirt. In fact, it looks like I'm actually putting in, it might even be the same tone, and I'm then going to lighten it with white or a lighter green even. That's what I've done. I've done a shadow side of the shirt, and now even though I haven't drawn in the shirt underneath there, I think it can go there quite comfortably. And trying to build up a little bit of a convincing frame around the portrait. But this is why I like oil pastels, is that as much as I'm scrubbing and, really pushing the pigment onto there, it still feels like it's covering with a really strong matte finish. It's opaque. You don't see through it except for the gaps where I haven't drawn, and that's really strong as far as a medium goes, in my view, is to show a complete flat coverage of colour. The reason is that if you're going to use transparency on a piece, then it needs to be a lot more delicate and you need to use it very carefully. And for a matte piece, it speaks of a flat kind of strength to the portrait. And all of the nuance needs to be in the subtleties of the features and perhaps the light and shadow on the face. So I think that's why as well I'm quite taken by this pose of John, is that it shows how he has a softness to him, a wisdom and a kindness, but he's also a very strong person, both physically and emotionally and mentally. He's a very interesting chap. I do enjoy talking to him. He's full of stories from farming and from his travels. Not only his own stories, but he shares those of others, which are really fascinating, because it's one thing to hear the story of someone else, it's quite another to hear it being retold from the appreciation of the listener. I'm putting a light edge around John there, so you can see a touch of white along the top. I think that's quite an important aspect of trying to capture a light side as well. But yeah, you can see here the green of the shirt, how there are flakes of the oil pastel that have collected. And that, as I was saying earlier, is the difference between oil pastel and soft pastel as well, as far as the use of it. With soft pastel, it would be mounds of dust that have collected. And on the face there was touches of green, so you can just get that light pink and go over it and completely cover it. One of the strengths of oil pastel is that it can just be completely erased because of how heavy the pigment is on top. But then to do touches of light on the shadow side, we're also going to complement the reflected light and the planes of the face to try and help describe how light works in these types of atmospheres and environments. It's not an amazing portrait. I don't mean to talk it up as though I've done an amazing job. I'm just saying that this is my rationality of why I'm trying to put certain marks in certain places, is that I don't want to just leave it too graphic. I want to try and push things around in order to complement the person who I obviously care about in this portrait. I do know John, so I want it to have some sense of who he is, even if it doesn't have a great likeness to him. But I'm sure he'd recognise it if I were to show this to him. He hasn't actually seen this portrait. He's seen the other painted one, not in person, but he's seen a photograph of it and he liked it, which could just be him being kind again. Now, I was conscious of the fact that there wasn't enough shadow on his on the right hand side of his forehead, his left. So I'm glad that I'm doing this, because this is necessary in order to sell the idea of a shadow side. And I didn't completely scrub the red. I just put it lightly, kind of pushed it on there lightly instead of really pressing down. I'm trying to soften the edges, and that gives it a blend, but it's also a softer red on the top because it wouldn't be as dark at the top of his head. The shadow will collect lower down and should reflect a deeper opacity lower, where the light would not be reflecting quite so much, just like in the crevices in your ear that I'm doing there. So just feeling my way through it and enjoying the fact that it is some semblance of a portrait. Touches of light on the left hand side. We're also going to add a little bit of nuance to some of the planes of the face where the light would catch. And if I had to do this without a reference, I don't think I would have had the subtleties that you can see on the shadow side, but I think I could feel my way through where certain light and shadow would go, and I'm curious to see how far I could get without a reference. But there are certain decisions I know I wouldn't make. Just like the eye socket is such a sharp shadow, I think I would soften that, and I probably would have put more shadow on the eyelids, just out of experience of seeing that happen. But that's not always the case. You can't always predict where things are going to sit as far as shadows and light until you have a strong reference to dictate the truth of the form and light. Now, I say the truth. I discuss this a lot with artists about how true photographic reference is, and it's not the most reliable thing. You have to try and find a nice middle ground between what you see and experience and what you can capture and take back as a reference, because those are very different things. But this is how I describe my friend John Williams, trying to do subtle stray hairs with the white, and as much as it's a blunt instrument, the oil pastel does get sharper edges carved out of it when you use them, so that can be handy to try and sweep a little, thread or wisp of hair when it's needed. But there's something else that I'm seeing, and I'm wondering if I do it in this picture or not, because at the moment I haven't watched through this process to see the decisions that I'm making, and I've been relieved that I touch up certain things like the nostrils here to make them less prominent. But I'm sure that at some point I do a couple of touches to the shirt, unless I'm wrong. Maybe I don't, but I thought I did, because the shirt is quite flat. Here we are, exactly as I was giving up hope. You can see there's going to be some mid-tone going in. I think you should really try to consider just little bits of shape design that can sell the idea of fabric. These little creases here and there just make me feel much better about leaving the shirt less detailed, because you don't need to do so much. You just need to do a little bit to suggest here's where some creases occur, this is the texture and movement of the shirt, and to try and sell the idea of light and shadow. And it makes a difference. Not only that, but to put in touches of a mid-tone, then surely you can put in touches of light, and that's what I'm doing here, is to try and show that the light catches the collar there, the light catches the edge on the light side, and it will make a difference to represent that. Because if you're trying to sell the idea of a light source, it's nice to reinforce that throughout certain parts of the drawing. So this is what I was hoping I would do. I wasn't going to mention it in case the video just ended, but I was sure that I did, and I was right. I haven't even looked at this portrait for a long time because it was such a long time ago that I made it. I've done so many more since that I forgot where it went. But here it is. My quick oil pastel portrait of John Williams. Thanks for watching.